Here we go. Money talk.
Here comes the money. Money, 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 money.
Dollar, dollar. Dollar, dollar.
All right, everyone, we've got another great guest on this week's episode of DubCast. Kind of a dual guest, our first ever. The handicapper duo known as Hammer It Bets. Follow them on Twitter at Hammer It Bets. You may know them from their very transparent modeling sheets or their excellence in European soccer, NHL, all that good stuff, or for just being your favorite handicappers north of the border. But we are really excited to have them in studio today to talk about their origin story, their approach, and all that good stuff. But before we get into it, Charlie, Cameron, please take a moment to say hello to the listeners at home.
Hey everyone, it's great to be on.
Yeah, very excited to be on with the OG Dub Club group here.
Before we get too deep into the models and the analytics and all the stuff that's running under the hood, I think it would be fun just to kind of get a peek behind the curtain as to how you guys got introduced to this world and how you guys met each other. For the listeners at home who aren't watching on YouTube, Charlie and Cameron are kind of a duo who work together to run the Hammer It Bets page. So would love to get more background on how you guys linked up and your journey as a handicapping duo.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start us off, Cam. But we've known each other since grade 9 or freshman year for the Americans listening. Been friends basically ever since. We played soccer and hockey together at school and outside of school. We both went to university for accounting and finance, but just different schools. So our career paths were kind of similar. We had similar, math and Excel skills. So about 2 years ago, when everyone was kind of bored with COVID, we were kind of thinking of something to do. And Cam came to me and said, well, we're probably smart enough. Let's try making some models and see how we do. So in May of 2020, that's when we kind of started building our models to see what we can do. And, we felt pretty comfortable with it. And then we launched our Twitter account, and we've just kind of grown since then.
I couldn't have said it any better.
Fantastic. And talk us through, you touched on it already, but the model-based approach. There's a lot of handicappers out there, and everybody says they've got their own secret sauce when it comes to, trying to identify value. But you guys are actually leading and sharing with your followers to say, this is where we should think things should price. This is where we think there's opportunity. When we don't have a play, this is the reason why we don't have a play. So kind of walk us through, A, how you built the model without giving away too much secret sauce, but B, why you think this transparency-first approach is kind of interesting to your followers.
So I guess a secret sauce. Basically, we take a bunch of stats that we think are relevant and put into a nice blender, and it gives us a nice output. We've been able to perfect and, I guess, automate the process to a certain extent. That makes it a lot easier to just kind of hop on, hit refresh for the stats, and it'll basically pull everything for us. So there's not a ton of day-to-day real rigorous data input features to it anymore. So that's been a huge part for us there. And then we basically build into the nice spreadsheets that we can show on Twitter with the outputs, the odds, the amount of units on each game, etc. And sorry, you had two questions. I don't really remember what the second one was.
So the second one is kind of why you think transparency is the right approach here. There's a lot of guys who have a model output, or don't, maybe, who knows, but they don't feel like it's the right business or strategic decision to actually share it with their followers, their subscribers. And you guys are very leading with that. So kind of why did you decide to do that from the jump, and kind of what kind of feedback do you get from subscribers based on that?
So a lot of people are like, oh, I'm doing 3 hours of research every day and whatever, but you don't typically get to see that, or they pull like one stat or a trend out of basically anywhere where they might have seen it on some article somewhere. It's like, oh, okay, then I'll take that. But what it really comes down to is a sporting event is basically a game of a probability, right? Like you have one team win, one team loses, and essentially what you're doing is assigning a probability to each side. And you can get that based on the statistics of the game, and you look at what drives wins. And in different sports, it's different things, right? So that's basically what goes into it. And in terms of transparency, I mean, this is a business of where people get scammed all the time for say, hey, we're gonna bet on this, blah blah blah. We're gonna go max 25 units on some bullshit, and I mean, if anybody's really doing that, then it's not necessarily a good sign. But people like to see what's under the hood, and it builds that relationship of trust with the subscribers. So
Super interesting, and I think one thing that our listeners will find interesting as well is you started in the Bundesliga, was your first model. And obviously this approach is highly sports specific. Talk to us about why Bundesliga was the right first league for you guys, how you have evolved since then, and maybe just a few pointers in terms of kind of the feature selection, if you will. What variables matter in a given sport, and then when you move to a new sport, what that means from your workflow when it comes to standing up a new model.
So with us choosing Bundesliga as our first model, it more so came down to timing. So sports were kind of just down. Nothing was playing for a while from that like 2-3 month period in 2020. And the German Bundesliga was the first one to pop up. So when we were getting ready for sports to restart, we started with that one so we could practice with it maybe the first 2-3 weeks that the Bundesliga was playing and nothing else was. So we found a lot of data on it. We pulled probably more data than we needed to into Excel, and we kind of spent a lot of hours together picking and choosing what stats we liked and what we didn't, what we wanted to contribute to our expected scores. So kind of like Cam was saying, we don't want to give away too much, but the gist of how we come up with our expected scores and our expected win percentages is we'll especially for soccer, we'll come up with expected goals against an average team. So we use the German league, say Bayern Munich, if they're playing the average team in Bundesliga, how much do we expect them to score? Say that goal's 2. They're going to score 2 goals against the average team. And then depending on who they're playing against, that's going to change. And with that, every team has a defensive rating. And what that defensive rating does will adjust a team's output. So say they're playing Dortmund. Dortmund is an above average team. Say they have a defensive rating of negative 0.5. We'll expect Bayern Munich to then score 1.5 goals against Dortmund. So we found a bunch of numbers that we liked. It worked for Bundesliga, where we're having some nice numbers. And then with that, all the other big European leagues were starting up. So that's when we made the England model. We made our France model, our Spain model, Italy. We're having fun with it, so we just kept going. And that's where we got into the Asian leagues because they were running their normal schedules. And we had some huge success in Korea, a little bit in Japan. And then we started getting into more sports. And I don't know if that falls into another question, but football was starting up in the fall. Hockey was kind of in a weird point because it was right in the middle of playoffs, so we didn't really start it then. We got baseball going, and basketball was another thing that followed the next year too.
What I love about your guys' approach is, like, I presume you're spending a lot of time fine-tuning the model out of the box. And then, to your point, it's kind of like click refresh and try to eliminate the human bias from the actual picking of the game, which is great, I think, learning for recreational bettors like myself and a lot of Dub Club subscribers. But how do you think about in-season kind of changes and maybe even longer term how sports change and styles of play change and maybe the variables that matter are changing over time? How do you think about the cadence of refreshing your model so you're not too finely tuned to any given sample set that you're using to training the data?
Yeah, so I think it's kind of like any business where the variables of like the market are constantly changing.
Yeah.
I think you see with sports nowadays there's a lot more of like the advanced analytics with any sport really out there. I think baseball is really a front runner with that, with just because it's such like a set outcome where it's like pitcher against batter basically. but it's starting to show in like football. We have like the DVOA, offense, defense kind of stuff. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of changing pieces that we have to consider at all times, just based on from an analytics standpoint, and what actually drives wins. Because I guess hockey is a good example. There's a lot of stats out there like Corsi, which was like kind of groundbreaking when it was first introduced, but it's kind of been known to be a little bit unreliable in actually driving wins. So there's like, oh, okay, there's this cool new stat out, but it's like how tested is it for actually showing wins? And then with all this new stuff coming out as well, like the bookies are going to know about this stuff too, right? Like it's not just from the betting side perspective. So, I mean, as soon as you think, hey, like, oh, I got this figured out, I know what's going on, the bookie's already one step ahead of you.
Yeah, I think that's a common thread for a lot of recreational bettors. Question kind of on the micro uncertainty in a given sports game. Because I think you ask anybody, there's a ton of buy-in that, over a long season, to your guys' point, this is really a probability problem, and it's about making a better mousetrap when it comes to, expected outputs. But in the micro, there's a lot of weird shit that can happen going into a single game. And we've talked a bit about this in the past, but would love to get your thoughts kind of on record in terms of when stuff happens near a game, maybe it's weather, maybe it's injuries, et cetera, how are you guys making sure that the model is not basically giving you false signals, that's not incorporating this new data? Because obviously you're not, when you hit refresh for your model in the morning, it's not going to tell you necessarily, Kyrie Irving had bad Chinese food last night and he's probably not going to play. So how do you think about staying focused on what you can control, which is the probability and the expected values, while also taking into account stuff that's kind of, oh shit, people aren't playing tonight, or there's going to be a blizzard in Foxborough, et cetera, et cetera?
So I'll start with player injuries. So basketball, our model is actually lineup based. So like you mentioned, if Kyrie Irving wasn't expected to play, he won't be included in the model, and Brooklyn's output would be affected accordingly. So that one we're pretty good covered with injuries. Football, we only really make changes for quarterback injuries. There's so many moving pieces in football, and like obviously a number one receiver or an edge rusher is going to affect the game by a point or two, but the quarterback is the one that really only makes any substantial difference to the expectation in terms of probability, or at least enough to change a play. It's not very often that a team that is heavily favored is going to become an underdog because their safety's out. With hockey, same, even less. Like hockey's one, like you'll see guys like, for example, I'm a Lightning fan. They lost their best player and they were first in the league when he came back. So it's hockey is that we kind of ignore that other than goalies. Weather is one where we kind of have to use personal opinion on it. So the model doesn't really incorporate weather. Also, it's like, the weather guys are always wrong too. It's hard to predict weather. It's hard to predict how they'll impact a sports game even more so. So we'll just say, okay, we're taking, it happened to us a few times last year where we maybe had an over in a game and it was a blizzard. So we just, okay, we can't take this over. There's not going to be a lot of points. And that's just a discussion we have between the two of us, or maybe whoever's running it that day will just say we're not taking this, or we'll switch sides on our play. But yeah, that's kind of how we deal with the, stuff like injuries, weather, things like, injuries in game, bad ref mistakes and whatnot. That's just, you almost expect that half the time that's going to go for you, half the time that's going to go against you. So you don't really incorporate that into it, but it's sports, right? That's going to happen regardless of what you're doing.
So, Charlie, first of all, did I hear you were a Tampa Bay Lightning fan?
I am, which is weird.
What is going on there? For everyone's benefit, these guys are some Canadians, so that caught my ear.
Well, before you chirp me too much for being a Lightning fan, Cam's a Sharks fan, so
what is going on with
all
you guys?
over the place here.
Some serious allegiance question marks.
Well, I jumped on the Lightning when I was 5 because I thought Lightning was cool, and I've just stuck with them since.
Lightning is cool.
Yeah.
I'll give you that.
It's not the greatest reason, but at least I didn't hop on last year when they won or something like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, at least you're loyal.
Yeah.
Going back to your point on kind of injuries being different impact for different sports, are there sports that are better fits for this approach? I mean, obviously, empirically, we can go through your performance sheet and do it that way, but just kind of anecdotally, in my brain, I think when you can slice it down to granularity of players, like in an NBA kind of model, that sounds really like an advantage versus being more an aggregate team view. Do you guys feel the same way? I know soccer's where you guys started. Do you think there's a real edge there for this kind of approach? Or kind of what are the sports that really, when that season comes around, like, okay, it's time to make some money?
I would think baseball probably is the best in terms of like a player's injury in and out kind of thing. Just because our model is based on the lineup of the team and then the opposing pitcher. The only thing where it's kind of gets skewed is the bullpen if there's injuries, but typically the teams that have a better bullpen often have better depth as it is anyways. So it's not too much of a difference there, but I mean, a lot of the times when people look at a baseball game, they just look at the starting pitcher, and with the starting pitcher going not as deep into games now, it becomes more highly reliant on the bullpen, and people often don't consider that. If you want to take an example for this past year, you look at the Philadelphia Phillies. They had some pretty decent starting pitchers, and their bullpen was awful. So Zach Wheeler is actually pretty profitable to bet against just because of the bullpen. And a lot of people would be like, "Oh, Zach Wheeler's pitching. He's got 10 strikeouts a game, whatever," and the team blows it in the 8th or 9th inning. So, I mean, it's called just kind of things like that you need to consider in terms of like on a player by player basis. NBA is definitely something that's really dependent on the player by player, mainly because they will play maybe like a maximum of 10 guys and probably be reliant on like 7. So one guy missing has a much bigger impact on the game, whereas, I mean, you get up to like soccer and football where there's 11 guys in the field now where maybe a couple of guys are important as opposed to, and even then, they don't even have as big of a factor in the game, so.
One thing that I love about your guys' approach that I think is really helpful for people who are trying to learn how to bet the right way and responsibly is that it takes a lot of bias out of the equation, right? Like the hardest things I think for people getting into this world is staying disciplined with your bankroll and, kind of not getting emotionally hijacked if you have something that you think's a winner and go off the rails with a bad beat, et cetera, et cetera. Is that still a struggle for you guys? Do you ever see a model output sheet and you're like, I don't know if I buy this? Or have you kind of stubbed your toe enough times to where it's just the model is the model, and maybe the only exception would be, like you said earlier, it's snowing and we have the over here, so maybe we take the foot off the gas?
There are definitely times when I look at it and I'm like, we're really betting against this team or really taking this team. I've just learned to say trust the model and run with it anyways, because I lost way more bets by just picking and choosing on my own than I did by just taking whatever the model output and betting those. The ones that hurt the most is when you're betting against your own team. That's where you really have to take the personal bias out of it. So I know times where hockey's a good example for this because, the Lightning are good and hockey lines are weird. It's almost, you'd probably almost make money betting the underdog every time, just given the way hockey works. Underdogs win quite often. But we'll bet against the Lightning. I'm like, I don't think they're losing tonight, but I just got to say, you know what, we have to go with it, because if they're playing a team that's getting 3-1 odds, you kind of have to take that if the numbers tell you to. And what helps with this is it takes the numbers down right to a very specific kind of micro level of data where, my brain just can't comprehend that. So I've just learned to say trust the model and kind of just maybe deal with the pain in the back of my head.
That's amazing. You guys are clearly, I hope you don't take offense to this as a Stanford guy, nerds, and numbers-oriented dudes. Do you have a favorite model that you built, or even a variable that's included in a model? And if so, can you kind of explain that nerd to nerd kind of an anecdote as to, wow, this is actually super highly correlated and maybe took you by surprise, or was kind of an interesting tidbit of knowledge, as you're probably, I'm sure that what the process is you have a million different variables and you're trying to down select for the ones that matter, and maybe some fun surprises or a sport where you thought, oh, this is really an interesting output and what actually matters and the features we're weighing.
I guess we can both give you an answer here. I know for me personally, it's going to sound really nerdy, but I kind of get a kick out of finding new Excel tips to use.
Okay.
To make the model
Yeah,
move
it does.
faster. So like especially when we started, when we were just constantly making it quicker and more automated as we were going, I was finding it cool to have with soccer, for example, I just had one input the match week, and it would flood through every single game and everything we needed, where the only thing that went into the soccer model was updating the week we were on. And then Now we've gotten to the point where we don't even need that. It just does it for us automatically. And that's something that, I know it's not stats based like you asked, but that's kind of what I get the nerdiest kick out of when we're doing this.
That's a very nerdy answer. I think our listeners will be pleased with that. Yeah. Cam, anything come to mind for you?
I don't really have much to add on to that. I really like how automated it is. But, I can't really add on to that. It's kind of got the same thing. I mean, learning the new Excel stuff is pretty cool. And, it's actually, applicable to what I do for a living, too. So, I mean, it's kind of useful.
Love it. And I think first of all, automating stuff is great because it quickens your daily process. And the whole point of this approach is to remove bias and kind of human, what's the right word? Maybe
human
indiscretion. Yeah. So, but what are some other benefits to you kind of getting it down to a science and reducing the day-to-day kind of work required? Does it mean it allows you time to build new models for new sports? Does that mean you're allowed to take more time to kind of refine which variables are being weighed because you don't have to spend 2 hours refreshing the model every day? How is kind of, as you've made this a factory approach really, how does that deliver even more value to your subscribers as you guys have your brain freed up for higher leverage stuff?
Yeah, so I would say it allows us to just interact more and allows us to do these kind of things because when we first started out to get the data in was some late nights for us, just to say the least. And then it took a little bit to refine it and get it down to what it is now. Obviously, people don't really understand the amount of work that actually goes into it and the dedication. But automating it to a point where we all we have to do is input the Dub Club stuff for our subscribers. It makes it really easy. And then it allows us to do things like this, get out there and try to get our name out there a little bit, and then kind of make things look pretty on the social media side and whatnot. So, yeah.
Fantastic. I think a lot of cappers in this world probably do the inverse, right? They're focused so much on the marketing and the promotional piece of this business, which is a very important piece of the business. But you guys being so foundationally analytical, I think is a really interesting differentiator. And I'm sure our listeners are going to eat up this kind of content. And I think your guys' approach is so interesting. Maybe last question, and then we'll get to the promo that you guys are running. We like to set aside a bit of time at the end of all these just to kind of let you do a little pitching of your own, kind of for someone who's on the fence about getting in the Dub Club ecosystem and a subscription. What should they expect in terms of volume of plays per day, the kind of analysis you're pushing out? Clearly, these are very well-researched and highly analytical plays, but kind of what should they expect from an engagement perspective and the kind of day-to-day routine?
Yeah, so right now, if someone was to sign up, they'd get NHL and NBA texted to them every day. Even if we don't have plays, we still update the Google sheet we have that has all the projection sheets. So obviously, just to explain those a little further, we have these full sheets where we show, expected score, probability of winning, projection of totals if you're betting over-unders. Each sport's a little different, but they're super useful if maybe you want to bet on something else or you just want to see how we're getting our bets. So we'll send those out every day. You'll get football once a week. There's only a few weeks left, so you'll get all the playoffs. Obviously, we'll still do. And then you'll get soccer. We'll send that out about once a week. The soccer models produce a ton of plays, so we do kind of reduce them. Some of them are in the lower leagues aren't as intriguing to people, so we try to stick with the bigger ones. And then baseball gets started in April, May, so that will come out around then. We're also pretty active on Twitter. There's 2 of us, so if you ever have any questions, we're always going to answer. We're never going to ignore you. So you kind of get, it's a little personal if that's kind of what you're looking for too. Like you said, it's all data driven. It's all automated, so there's very little human error in terms of what we're producing. There's no human bias, like we've talked about. And then I'm not sure if Cam wanted to add anything else that I might have missed.
Yeah, so the big thing really is the projection sheets. It basically allows you to make a play on something else that maybe we don't see the full value on. If you're thinking, oh, hey, I like the Cavs tonight, and then you go on the sheet, it's like, oh, okay, like there's like a lean on that side, so maybe I'll play it, kind of thing. Like just following our plays isn't the only thing that you get out of us. It's you get the information out of us as well. So like we have certain thresholds that we have to meet in order to have it be a play. Sure. So there could be stuff where it's like, oh, it's like 0.1 value off of being a play, but it'll come up as 0 units for us. Where it's like, oh, okay, if you think that, okay, this discrepancy is enough, then make a play for it, then that by all means you can look at that yourself and kind of make your own analysis from it. So
the projection sheets are so cool and so unique in this industry. And to your point, you're getting a lot more than just the official plays. You're getting kind of a counterpoint when you have a lean in your own brain and you see a third-party model that says that's not a good idea, or a little bit of supporting evidence, even if it's not an official play, to see there is some sort of value there. So kind of in keeping with that, we are offering a special promo as part of the DubCast with Hammer It Bets. So if you enter promo code HammerIt we'll type this out in the show notes. At checkout, you can get 25% off any package for your first period. So thanks so much to Hammer It Bets, Charlie, Cameron. Super fun interview. I'm sure people will love hearing more about your strategy, your approach, this data-driven everything. Very fun and interesting from my perspective. And look forward to seeing you guys continue to crush it, especially as NBA, NHL so hot right now, and MLB just around the corner.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks
for
for having
sure.
us on. I enjoyed it. I can't speak for myself.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's epic. All right. Super fun, guys.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.